The Politics of Experience and the Bird of Paradise by R.D. Laing. Chapter 6. Transcendental Experience. We are living in an age in which the ground is shifting and the foundations are shaking. I cannot answer for other times and places. Perhaps it has always been so. We know it is true today. In these circumstances, we have all reason to be insecure. When the ultimate basis of our world is in question, we run to different holes in the ground. We scurry into roles, statuses, identities, interpersonal relations. We attempt to live in castles that can only be in the air because there is no firm ground in the social cosmos on which to build. We are all witnesses to this state of affairs. Each sometimes sees the same fragment of the whole situation differently. Often our concern is with different presentations of the original catastrophe. In this chapter, I wish to relate the transcendental experiences that sometimes break through in psychosis to those experiences of the divine that are the living fount of all religion. In the last chapter, I outlined the way in which some psychiatrists are beginning to dissolve their clinical medical categories of understanding madness. If we can begin to understand sanity and madness in existential social terms, we shall be more able to see clearly the extent to which we all confront common problems and share common dilemmas. Experience may be judged to be invalidly mad or to be validly mystical. The distinction is not easy. In either case, from a social point of view, such judgments characterize different forms of behavior regarded in our society as deviant. People behave in such ways because their experience of themselves is different. It is on the existential meaning of such unusual experience that I wish to focus. Psychotic experience goes beyond the horizons of our common, that is, our communal sense. What regions of experience does this lead to? It entails a loss of the usual foundations of the sense of the world that we share with one another. Old purposes no longer seem viable. Old meanings are senseless. The distinctions between imagination, dream, external perceptions often seem no longer to apply in the old way. External events may seem magically conjured up. Dreams may seem direct communications from others. Imagination may seem to be objective reality. But most radically of all, the very ontological foundations are shaken. The being of phenomena shifts, and the phenomena of being may no longer present itself to us as before. There are no supports, nothing to cling to, except perhaps some fragments from the wreck, a few memories, names, sounds, one or two objects that retain a link with a world long lost. This void may not be empty. It may be peopled by visions and voices, ghosts, strange shapes and apparitions. No one who has not experienced how insubstantial the pageant of external reality can be, how it may fade, can fully realize the sublime and grotesque presences that can replace it, or that can exist alongside it. When a person goes mad, a profound transposition of his position in relation to all domains of being occurs. His center of experience moves from ego to self. Mundane time becomes merely anecdotal, only the eternal matters. The madman is, however, confused. He muddles ego with self, inner with outer, natural and supernatural. Nevertheless, he often can be to us, even through his profound wretchedness and disintegration, the hierophant of the sacred. An exile from the scene of being as we know it. He is an alien, a stranger, signaling to us from the void in which he is foundering, a void which may be peopled by presences that we do not even dream of. They used to be called demons and spirits, and they used to be known and named. He has lost his sense of self, his feelings, his place in the world as we know it. He tells us he is dead, but we are distracted from our cozy security by this mad ghost that haunts us with his visions and voices that seem so senseless and of which we feel impelled to rid him, cleanse him, cure him. Madness need not be all breakdown. It may also be breakthrough. It is potentially liberation and renewal as well as enslavement and existential death. There are now a growing number of accounts by people who have been through the experience of madness. Asterisk. See, for example, the anthology The Inner World of Mental Illness, edited by Kaplan, and Beyond All Reason by Coate. The following is part of one of the earlier contemporary accounts, as recorded by Carl Jaspers in his General Psychopathology, asterisk, Manchester University Press. I believe I caused the illness myself. In my attempt to penetrate the other world, I met its natural guardians, the embodiment of my own weaknesses and faults. I first thought these demons were lowly inhabitants of the other world who could play me like a ball, because I went into these regions unprepared and lost my way. Later, I thought they were split off parts of my own mind, passions, which existed near me in free space and thrived on my feelings. I believed everyone else had these too, but did not perceive them, thanks to the protective and successful deceit of the feeling of personal existence. I thought the latter was an artifact of memory, thought complexes, etc., a doll that was nice enough to look at from outside but nothing real inside it. In my case, the personal self had grown porous because of my dimmed consciousness. Through it, I wanted to bring myself closer to the higher sources of life. I should have prepared myself for this over a long period by invoking in me a higher impersonal self, since nectar is not for mortal lips. It acted destructively on the animal-human self, split it up into its parts. These gradually disintegrated. The doll was really broken and the body damaged. I had forced untimely access to the source of life. The curse of the gods descended on me. I recognized too late that murky elements had taken a hand. I got to know them after they had already too much power. There was no way back. I now had the world of spirits I had wanted to see. The demons came up from the abyss as guardian Cerberi, denying admission to the unauthorized. I decided to take up the life and death struggle. This meant for me in the end a decision to die, since I had put aside everything that maintained the enemy, but this was also everything that maintained life. I wanted to enter death without going mad, and stood before the Sphinx, either thou into the abyss or I. Then came illumination. I fasted, and so penetrated into the true nature of my seducers. They were pimps and deceivers of my dear personal self, which seemed as much a thing of naught as they. A larger and more comprehensive self emerged, and I could abandon the previous personality with its entire entourage. I saw this earlier personality could never enter transcendental realms. I felt as a result a terrible pain, like an annihilating blow. But I was rescued. The demons shriveled, vanished, and perished. A new life began for me, and from now on I felt different from other people. A self that consisted of conventional lies, shams, self-deceptions, memory images, a self just like that of other people, grew in me again, but behind and above it stood a greater and more comprehensive self, which impressed me with something of what is eternal, unchanging, immortal, and inviolable, and which ever since that time has been my protector and refuge. I believe it would be good for many if they were acquainted with such a higher self, and that there are people who have attained this goal, in fact, by kinder means. Jaspers comments, such interpretations are obviously made under the influence of delusion-like tendencies and deep psychic forces. They originate from profound experiences And the wealth of such schizophrenic experience calls on the observer as well as on the reflective patient not to take all this merely as a chaotic jumble of contents. Mind and spirit are present in the morbid psychic life as well as in the healthy. But interpretations of this sort must be divested of any causal importance. All they can do is throw light on content and bring it into some sort of context. This patient has described, with a lucidity I could not improve upon, a very ancient quest, with its pitfalls and dangers. Jaspers still speaks of this experience as morbid, and tends to discount the patient's own construction. Yet both the experience and construction may be valid in their own terms. Certain transcendental experiences seem to me to be the original wellspring of all religions. Some psychotic people have transcendental experiences. Often, to the best of their recollection, they have never had such experiences before, and frequently they will never have them again. I am not saying, however, that psychotic experience necessarily contains this element more manifestly than sane experience. We experience in different modes. We perceive external realities, we dream, imagine, have semi-conscious reveries. Some people have visions, hallucinations, experience faces transfigured, see auras, and so on. Most people, most of the time, experience themselves and others in one or other way that I shall call egoic. That is, centrally or peripherally, they experience the world and themselves in terms of a consistent identity, a me here over against a you there, within a framework of certain ground structures of space and time shared with other members of their society. This identity-anchored, space and time-bound experience has been studied philosophically by Kant and later by the phenomenologists, e.g. Husserl, Merleau-Ponty. Its historical and ontological relativity should be fully realized by any contemporary student of the human scene. Its cultural, socioeconomic relativity has become a commonplace among anthropologists and a platitude to the Marxists and neo-Marxists. And yet, with the consensual and interpersonal confirmation it offers, it gives us a sense of ontological security, whose validity we experience as self-validating, although metaphysically, historically, ontologically, socio-economically, culturally, we know its apparent absolute validity as an illusion. In fact, all religious and all existential philosophies have agreed that such egoic experience is a preliminary illusion, a veil, a film of Maya, a dream to Heraclitus and to Lao Tzu, the fundamental illusion of all Buddhism, a state of sleep, of death, of socially accepted madness, a womb state to which one has to die, from which one has to be born. The person going through ego loss or transcendental experiences may or may not become in different ways confused. Then he might legitimately be regarded as mad. But to be mad is not necessarily to be ill, notwithstanding that in our culture the two categories have become confused. It is assumed that if a person is mad, whatever that means, then ipso facto he is ill, whatever that means. The experience that a person may be absorbed in, while to others he appears simply ill-mad, may be for him veritable manna from heaven. The person's whole life may be changed, but it is difficult not to doubt the validity of such vision. Also, not everyone comes back to us again. Are these experiences simply the effulgence of a pathological process, of a particular alienation? I do not think they are. In certain cases, a man blind from birth may have an operation performed which gives him his sight. The result, frequently misery, confusion, disorientation. The light that illuminates the madman is an unearthly light. it is not always a distorted refraction of his mundane life situation. He may be irradiated by light from other worlds. It may burn him out. This other world is not essentially a battlefield wherein psychological forces, derived or diverted, displaced or sublimated from their original object cathexes, are engaged in an illusory fight, although such forces may obscure such realities, just as they may obscure so-called external realities. When Ivan, in The Brothers Karamazov, says, "If God does not exist, everything is permissible," he is not saying, "If my superego in projected form can be abolished, I can do anything with a good conscience." He is saying, "If there is only my conscience, then there is no ultimate validity for my will." Among physicians and priests, there should be some who are guides, who can educt the person from this world and induct him to the other, to guide him in it and to lead him back again. One enters the other world by breaking a shell, or through a door, through a partition. The curtains part or rise, a veil is lifted. 7 veils, 7 seals, 7 heavens. The ego is the instrument for living in this world. If the ego is broken up or destroyed by the insurmountable contradictions of certain life situations, by toxins, chemical changes, etc., then the person may be exposed to other worlds, real in different ways from the more familiar territory of dreams, imagination, perception, or fantasy. The world that one enters, one's capacity to experience it, seems to be partly conditional on the state of one's ego. Our time has been distinguished, more than by anything else, by a drive to control the external world, by an almost total forgetfulness of the internal world. If one estimates human evolution from the point of view of knowledge of the external world, then we are in many ways progressing. If our estimate is from the point of view of the internal world, and of oneness of internal and external, then the judgment must be very different. Phenomenologically, the terms internal and external have little validity, but in this whole realm one is reduced to mere verbal expedients. Words are simply the finger pointing to the moon. One of the difficulties of talking in the present day of these matters is that the very existence of inner realities is now called into question. By inner, I mean our way of seeing the external world and all those realities that have no external, objective presence: imagination, dreams, fantasies, trances, the realities of contemplative and meditative states, realities that modern man, for the most part, has not the slightest direct awareness of. For example, nowhere in the Bible is there any argument about the existence of gods, demons, angels. People did not first believe in God. They experienced his presence, as was true of other spiritual agencies. The question was not whether God existed, but whether this particular God was the greatest God of all, or the only God, and what was the relation of the various spiritual agencies to each other. Today there is a public debate, not as to the trustworthiness of God, the particular place in the spiritual hierarchy of different spirits, etc., but whether God or such spirits even exist, or ever have existed. Sanity today appears to rest very largely on a capacity to adapt to the external world, the interpersonal world, and the realm of human collectivities. As this external human world is almost completely and totally estranged from the inner, any personal direct awareness of the inner world has already grave risks. But since society, without knowing it, is starving for the inner, the demands on people to evoke its presence in a safe way, in a way that need not be taken seriously, etc., is tremendous, while the ambivalence is equally intense. Small wonder that the list of artists, in say the last 150 years, who have been shipwrecked on these reefs is so long: Houdelin, John Clare, Rimbaud, Van Gogh, Nietzsche, Antonin Artaud. Those who survived have had exceptional qualities, a capacity for secrecy, slyness, cunning, a thoroughly realistic appraisal of the risks they run, not only from the spiritual realms that they frequent, but from the hatred of their fellows for anyone engaged in this pursuit. Let us cure them. The poet who mistakes a real woman for his muse and acts accordingly, the young man who sets off in a yacht in search of God. The outer, divorced from any illumination from the inner, is in a state of darkness. We are in an age of darkness. The state of outer darkness is a state of sin, i.e. alienation or estrangement from the inner light. Asterisk. Eliade, the Two and the One. Certain actions lead to greater estrangement. Certain others help one not to be so far removed. The former used to be called sinful. The ways of losing one's way are legion. Madness is certainly not the least unambiguous. The counter-madness of Krepelinian psychiatry is the exact counterpart of official psychosis. Literally and absolutely seriously, it is as mad, if by madness we mean any radical estrangement from the totality of what is the case. Remember Kierkegaard's objective madness. As we experience the world, so we act. We conduct ourselves in the light of our view of what is the case and what is not the case. That is, each person is a more or less naive ontologist. Each person has views of what is and what is not. There is no doubt, it seems to me, that there have been profound changes in the experience of man in the last 1,000 years. In some ways, this is more evident than changes in the patterns of his behavior. There is everything to suggest that man experienced God. Faith was never a matter of believing he existed, but of trusting in the presence that was experienced and known to exist as a self-validating datum. It seems likely that far more people in our time neither experience the presence of God nor the presence of his absence, but the absence of his presence. We require a history of phenomena, not simply more phenomena of history. As it is, the secular psychotherapist is often in the role of the blind leading the half-blind. The fountain has not played itself out. The flame still shines. The river still flows. The string still bubbles forth. The light has not faded. But between us and it, there is a veil which is more like 50 feet of solid concrete. Deus absconditus, or we have absconded. Already everything in our time is directed to categorizing and segregating this reality from objective facts. That is precisely the concrete wall. Intellectually, emotionally, interpersonally, organizationally, intuitively, theoretically, we have to blast our way through the solid wall, even at the risk of chaos, madness, and death. For from this side of the wall, this is the risk. There are no assurances, no guarantees. Many people are prepared to have faith in the sense of scientifically indefensible belief in an untested hypothesis. Few have trust enough to test it. Many people make believe what they experience. Few are made to believe by their experience. Paul of Tarsus was picked up by the scruff of the neck, thrown to the ground, and blinded for 3 days. This direct experience was self-validating. We live in a secular world. To adapt to this world, the child abdicates its ecstasy. L'enfant Mallarmé. Having lost our experience of the Spirit, we are expected to have faith. But this faith comes to be a belief in a reality which is not evident. There is a prophecy in Amos that there will be a time when there will be a famine in the land, not a famine for bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. That time has now come to pass. it is the present age. From the alienated starting point of our pseudo-sanity, everything is equivocal. Our sanity is not true sanity. Their madness is not true madness. The madness of our patients is an artifact of the destruction wreaked on them by us, and by them on themselves. Let no one suppose that we meet true madness any more than that we are truly sane. The madness that we encounter in patients is a gross travesty, a mockery, a grotesque caricature of what the natural healing of that estranged integration we call sanity might be. True sanity entails in one way or another the dissolution of the normal ego, that false self competently adjusted to our alienated social reality, the emergence of the inner archetypal mediators of divine power, and through this death a rebirth, and the eventual reestablishment of a new kind of ego functioning, the ego now being the servant of the divine, no longer its betrayer.